The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Nexus Prime Station. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window and stared at the massive structure floating in space. The station was bigger than any city he had ever seen back on Earth. Bright lights covered its surface like stars, and ships moved around it like tiny insects. Jake picked up his bag and walked toward the exit with the other new cadets. His stomach felt tight with nerves. He was 20 years old and had never been away from Colorado for more than a few weeks. Now he was millions of miles from home, about to train with aliens at the most famous military school in the galaxy. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Jake stepped into Nexus Prime and his mouth fell open. The main corridor was huge, with a ceiling so high he could barely see the top. Beings he had only seen in pictures walked past him. A group of tall, blue creatures with crystal skin caught the light as they moved. Their bodies looked like they were made of living glass. "Those are Zephyrians," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see another human cadet, a girl with short red hair. "I'm Lisa Kane. You must be one of the new Earth cadets." "Jake Morrison," he replied, shaking her hand. "This place is incredible." "Wait until you see the Academy section," Lisa said. "I've been here for 3 months already. The aliens are nice enough, but they think we're pretty weak." Before Jake could ask what she meant, something bumped into him from behind. It felt like walking into a wall. Jake stumbled forward and turned around to see what had hit him. Standing behind him was the biggest creature he had ever seen. It looked like a giant beetle that had learned to walk on 2 legs. Its body was covered in thick, dark armor that looked strong enough to stop bullets. 4 arms stuck out from its shoulders, each one as thick as Jake's leg. "Sorry, little human," the creature said in a deep voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Did not see you there. You are very small." Jake looked up at the alien's face. It had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern and a mouthful of teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. But the creature's voice was friendly, not mean. "No problem," Jake said. "I'm Jake Morrison." "I am Vex of the Corothian Defense Corps," the alien replied. "We will be bunkmates, I believe. The Academy puts different species together, so we learn to work as teams," Lisa whispered in Jake's ear. "Corothians are tough. Their skin can stop plasma blasts. They're some of the best fighters in the galaxy." Jake nodded and followed Vex down the corridor. Other cadets walked with them, all heading toward the Academy section. Jake saw creatures he didn't recognize. Some looked like large fish that somehow walked on land, with smooth skin that seemed wet even though it wasn't. Others glowed with their own light, their bodies made of what looked like pure energy held in a rough human shape. The group entered a large room, filled with seats arranged in circles. At the front stood a massive alien that made even Vex look small. This creature had 6 legs and arms that ended in sharp claws. Scars covered its dark skin, and one of its 3 eyes was clouded over with old damage. "I am Commandant Zorak," the creature announced in a voice that could be heard clearly across the entire room. "You are cadets of the Intergalactic Military Academy. Some of you will become officers in the United Worlds Defense Force. Others will wash out and return home in shame." Jake felt the other cadets shifting nervously around him. Even the tough-looking Corothians seemed worried. "The Academy has trained warriors from 47 different species," Zora continued. "Each species brings its own strengths. Corothians bring armor and strength. Zephyrians bring speed and their crystal abilities. Nautilians bring underwater skills and intelligence. Luminar bring energy manipulation." The Commandant's 3 eyes swept across the room and stopped on the small group of human cadets. "Humans bring diplomacy and technical skills," Zorak said. "They are useful for negotiations and computer work. They are not known for combat abilities." Jake heard some of the alien cadets making sounds that might have been laughter. His face grew hot, but he kept quiet. "Your final test will be the Crucible," Zorak announced. "It is a moon where the gravity is 3 times normal. The air is poison. The wildlife wants to kill you. You must survive there for 72 hours with minimal equipment. Many cadets do not pass this test. Some do not survive it. A Zephyrian cadet raised one crystal arm. Commandant, what assistance is provided for species that cannot handle the gravity? Mechanical suits for those who need them, Zorak replied. But remember, in real combat, you may not have such help. The Crucible tests your natural abilities. After the briefing, Jake followed Vex to their shared quarters. The room was built for large aliens, so everything was too big for Jake. The bed was like a small platform, and he had to climb up to reach it. Do not take Zorak's words badly, Vex said as he arranged his equipment. Humans have many good qualities. You are smart and you work well with others. This is important in war. But not as important as being able to stop plasma blasts with your skin, Jake replied. Vex's 4 eyes blinked, and what Jake was learning was the Corothian equivalent of a smile. True, but battles are not won by armor alone, you will see. That night, Jake lay on his oversized bed and stared at the ceiling. Through the room's window, he could see Earth as a tiny blue dot among the stars. It looked so far away, he thought about why he had come here. Back home, humans were just starting to explore space. They had been invited to join the United Worlds, but most people thought humans would always be the weak members of the Alliance. Jake wanted to prove that wasn't true. The next morning, training began. Jake's squad included Vex, a Nautilin named Coral, who looked like a walking dolphin, and a Luminar called Bright, whose body glowed with soft yellow light. Their first exercise was basic combat. Jake watched as Vex sparred with another Corothian. When their armored fists hit each other, it sounded like hammers striking anvils. Neither one seemed hurt by blows that would have broken Jake's bones. Coral demonstrated underwater combat in a large tank. She moved through the water faster than Jake could run on land, and she could hold her breath for over an hour. Bright showed how Luminar could phase through solid walls and shoot energy from their hands. The target dummy exploded into pieces. When Bright's energy beam hit it, then it was Jake's turn. The instructor, a scarred Corothian veteran named Commander Tallis, handed him a practice weapon. Show us what humans can do, Cadet Morrison, Tallis said. Jake took the weapon and faced the practice dummy. He wasn't as strong as Vex, as fast as Coral, or as powerful as Bright, but he had trained in martial arts since he was a kid. He knew how to move efficiently and how to hit where it would do the most damage. He attacked the dummy with a series of quick strikes, targeting weak points and moving constantly to avoid counterattacks. When he finished, the dummy was badly damaged, but Jake was breathing hard and sweating. Adequate, Commander Tallis said. But what happens when you face an opponent who can absorb your attacks and hit back hard enough to break your bones? Jake looked around at his squadmates. They were all watching him with expressions he couldn't read. He realized that they expected him to fail when things got really tough. I guess we'll find out, Jake said quietly. 3 months passed at the academy, and Jake had learned to live with being different. Every morning, he woke up to see Vex already polishing his natural armor. The Corothian's shell had gotten thicker and harder since training began. Meanwhile, Jake's body had gotten stronger and faster, but he was still soft compared to his roommate. During breakfast, Jake sat with his squad in the huge dining hall. Coral ate something that looked like seaweed soup, while Bright absorbed energy from a special crystal instead of eating food. Vex crunched through metal bars that were supposed to be nutritious for Corothians. Jake ate regular human food from Earth that tasted like cardboard. The Academy tried to make foods that each species could eat, but they weren't very good at it. Today we have advanced combat training, Vex said between bites of metal. Commander Tallis says we will fight without weapons, hand-to-hand only. Easy for you to say, Jake replied. You could probably punch through a wall. Actually, I have punched through walls, Vex said seriously. It is part of Corothian basic training. Bright's glow flickered, which Jake had learned meant the Luminar was amused. Human Jake always makes jokes when he is nervous. I'm not nervous, Jake lied, but he was. Hand-to-hand combat was his worst subject. He was getting better at fighting with weapons and tactical planning, but when it came to raw physical fighting, he couldn't compete with his alien classmates. An hour later, Jake stood in the combat training room wearing protective padding. The padding was designed for humans and would help prevent serious injury, but it wouldn't stop the pain. Commander Tallis walked around the group of cadets. His three eyes moved independently, watching everyone at once. Today you fight cadets. From other squads, no weapons, no special abilities. Just strength, speed, and skill. Jake watched as other cadets were matched up. Two Corothians fought each other, their armored fists making loud crashes every time they connected. Neither one seemed to feel the impacts that would have knocked Jake unconscious. A pair of Zephyrians moved so fast that Jake could barely see them. Their crystal bodies reflected the lights as they spun and struck at each other with perfect precision. Cadet. Morrison, Commander Tallis called out. You will fight Cadet Koroth. Jake's stomach dropped. Koroth was the biggest Corothian in their class, even larger than Vex. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall and was almost as wide as he was tall. His armor was dark brown and covered with scratches from previous fights. This should be over. Quickly, Jake heard someone whisper. Jake walked to the center of the fighting area. Koroth stomped over and looked down at him. The Corothian's 4 eyes blinked slowly. I will try not to hurt you too badly, little human, Koroth said. His voice was kind, but Jake could hear pity in it. Thanks, Jake said. He took a fighting stance and tried to remember everything he had learned about fighting larger opponents. Commander Tallis raised one clawed hand. Begin. Koroth moved faster than Jake expected for something so big. One massive fist swung toward Jake's head. Jake ducked and rolled to the side, but he wasn't fast enough. The punch caught him in the shoulder and sent him flying across the room. Jake hit the padded wall hard enough to knock the breath out of his lungs. Pain shot through his shoulder and down his arm. He could taste blood in his mouth where he had bitten his tongue. The watching cadets made sounds of sympathy. To them, the fight was already over. Jake should stay down and let the medical team check him for injuries. Instead, Jake pushed himself off the wall and stood up. He wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand and walked back toward Koroth. Again, Jake said. Koroth's 4 eyes widened with surprise. You are hurt. Perhaps we should stop. I'm fine, Jake lied. His shoulder felt like it was on fire, and his vision was a little blurry. Come on. Commander Tallis was watching with interest now. Continue, he ordered. Koroth shrugged and attacked again. This time Jake was ready. He avoided the first punch and managed to land a hit on Koroth's side. It was like punching a brick wall. Jake's knuckles exploded with pain. But Koroth didn't even seem to notice. The Corothian's backhand caught Jake across the chest and lifted him off his feet. Jake flew backward and crashed into a pile of training equipment. Metal bars and weights scattered around him as he rolled across the floor. Jake's ribs screamed with pain. He was pretty sure at least one was cracked. His protective padding had absorbed some of the impact, but not nearly enough. He should stay down. Any reasonable person would stay down. Jake got back up. Human Jake, what are you doing? Bright called out. The Luminar's glow was flickering rapidly with concern. Jake didn't answer. He just walked back toward Koroth again, his movements slower and more careful now. Blood was running from his nose, and his left arm hung awkwardly at his side. This is foolish, Koroth said. You cannot win. Why do you continue? Because I'm not done yet, Jake replied. The fight continued. Jake couldn't hurt Koroth, but he kept trying different approaches. He used speed and agility to avoid the worst of the Corothians' attacks, but some still got through. Each hit sent Jake tumbling across the room, and each time he got back up, after 20 minutes, Jake was a mess. His nose was definitely broken. One eye was swelling shut. His ribs hurt every time he breathed. His protective padding was torn in several places, but he was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to give up. Koroth, meanwhile, wasn't even breathing hard. The Corothian had barely been touched, and the few hits Jake had landed hadn't done any damage at all. Enough, Commander Tallis finally called out. The exercise is over. Jake swayed on his feet but stayed upright. Medical cadets rushed over to check his injuries, but he waved them away. I can walk, he said. His voice sounded funny because of his broken nose. Commander Tallis approached Jake slowly. All three of his eyes focused on the human cadet. "Why did you continue fighting?" the commander asked. "You could not win." Any rational being would have surrendered after the first hit. Jake thought about the question. His head was pounding and it was hard to think clearly. "Because giving up is worse than getting hurt," he finally said. The training room had gone quiet. All the cadets were staring at Jake. He could see confusion in their alien faces. They didn't understand why he had kept fighting when he had no chance of winning. Vex walked over to Jake and gently put one massive hand on his good shoulder. "That was either very brave or very stupid," the Corothian said. "Probably both," Jake admitted. Over the following weeks, word spread about the human cadet who wouldn't stay down. Other cadets started watching Jake's training sessions. They saw him take hits that would send most species to the medical bay. But Jake always got back up. In weapons training, Jake faced off against a Zephyrian whose crystal skin could deflect energy blasts. The alien's practice sword shattered Jake's weapon and left a deep cut across his chest. Jake picked up the broken pieces of his sword and kept fighting. During endurance training, Jake collapsed from exhaustion twice but crawled to the finish line rather than quit. The other cadets finished hours before him, but they waited to see if he would make it. In tactical simulations, Jake's team was killed in the first few minutes of most exercises. But even when the computer said he was dead, Jake kept giving orders and trying to complete the mission. "It is not normal," Coral told Vex one evening. "Humans feel pain the same way we do, but Jake acts like pain means nothing to him." "I do not think he feels less pain," Vex replied thoughtfully. "I think he has decided that pain is not important." Commander Tallis watched it all. The scarred veteran had seen cadets from dozens of species, but he had never seen anything quite like Jake Morrison. Most beings had built-in safety systems that made them stop fighting when they were badly hurt. It was basic survival instinct. Jake seemed to have broken his. One evening, after a particularly brutal training session, Commander Tallis found Jake in the medical bay getting his latest injuries treated. The human was sitting on an examination table while a medical robot stitched up a cut on his forehead. "Cadet Morrison," Tallis said, "may I ask you something?" "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "What drives you to continue when logic says you should stop?" Jake was quiet for a moment. The medical robot finished its work and moved away. "Back on Earth, humans have a saying," Jake finally said. "We say that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." "I do not understand," Tallis admitted. Jake smiled, which made his split lip start bleeding again. "It means that being big and tough doesn't matter as much as refusing to quit. I might not be as strong as the other cadets, but I can be more stubborn than any of them." Commander Tallis left the medical bay with a lot to think about. In all his years of training warriors, he had never considered stubbornness to be a military asset. Maybe it was time to reconsider. Graduation day arrived faster than Jake expected. 1 year of training had passed, and now it was time for the final test. He stood in the equipment bay with his squad, putting on his environmental suit. The suit was designed to keep him alive on hostile worlds, but it felt heavy and awkward. Vex was checking his own gear nearby. The Corothian suit was much thicker than Jake's because his natural armor made it harder to fit properly. Coral was testing her breathing apparatus, which would let her process the poisonous air of the Crucible Moon. Bright didn't need a suit at all, since energy beings could survive in almost any environment. "Remember the mission," Commander Tallis announced to all the graduating squads. "Survive 72 hours on the Crucible. Reach the extraction point at the end of that time. Work as a team, but know that some of you may not make it back." Jake's stomach felt tight. He had heard stories about the Crucible from older cadets. The moon was a nightmare world where everything wanted to kill you. The gravity was 3 times stronger than Earth normal. The air was full of acid that would burn your lungs. And the wildlife saw any visitor as either food or a threat to be eliminated. "Squad 7, prepare for drop," came the announcement over the speakers. That was Jake's squad. He picked up his pack, which contained food, water, medical supplies, and ammunition for 3 days. The pack felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but that was partly because of the heavy gravity they would face. The squad walked to the dropship. Other squads were already loading into their own ships. Jake saw cadets from species he had trained with for a year, and he wondered how many of them would be coming back. The dropship was small and cramped. Jake strapped himself into a seat between Vex and Coral. Bright floated nearby, not needing a seat since energy beings didn't worry about things like crash impacts. Launching in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Jake felt his heart beating faster. This was it. Everything he had trained for came down to the next 3 days. The ship dropped away from Nexus Prime Station and headed toward the Crucible moon. Through the small window, Jake could see the moon growing larger. Its surface was dark red and covered with jagged mountains and deep valleys. Storm clouds swirled around it constantly. "Looks friendly," Jake said, trying to make a joke. "The Crucible has killed more cadets than any other training exercise," Vex replied seriously. "We must be very careful." 20 minutes later, the dropship entered the moon's atmosphere. The ride became rough as the ship fought through the storm clouds. Jake gripped his seat as the ship shook and bounced. "Drop zone in 60 seconds. The pilot called out. "Environmental suits better be working properly, because you're not coming back up here if they fail." The ship's cargo door opened, and Jake looked out at the Crucible's surface. They were flying over a rocky wasteland dotted with strange, twisted trees. In the distance, he could see mountains that glowed with their own light. "Go, go!" the pilot shouted. The squad jumped from the ship one by one. Jake leaped out and felt the heavy gravity grab him immediately. He fell much faster than he expected and hit the ground hard. His knees buckled and he rolled across the rocky surface. His environmental suit systems started talking to him right away. "Warning, gravity 3.2 times standard. Warning, external atmosphere toxic. Warning, multiple life forms detected nearby." Jake pushed himself to his feet. The heavy gravity made every movement difficult. His pack felt like it weighed twice as much as it had on the ship. The rest of his squad landed around him. Vex hit the ground like a boulder, but didn't seem bothered by the impact. Coral landed more gracefully, her suit systems helping her adjust to the different gravity. Bright simply floated down without any problems at all. "Equipment check," Vex ordered. As the squad's senior member, he was in charge during the exercise. Jake checked his suit's readings. Everything was working, but the heavy gravity was already making him tired. He looked around at the landscape. The twisted trees moved even though there was no wind. The rocks under his feet had a strange purple color that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at it. "This place gives me the creeps," Coral said through the radio. "Stay alert," Vex warned. "The wildlife here has evolved to hunt anything that moves. We need to find shelter before dark." The squad started walking across the rocky ground. Every step was an effort in the heavy gravity. Jake's legs were already starting to ache, and they had only been on the surface for 10 minutes. They found a cave in the side of a hill just as the sun was setting. The cave was deep enough to provide shelter, but not so deep that they couldn't see the entrance. Vex used his natural strength to move some large rocks to partly block the opening. "We take turns on watch," Vex decided, 2 hours each. "I will take first watch." Jake was glad to rest. He sat down against the cave wall and tried to eat some of his rations. The food tasted terrible, but he needed the energy. Through his suit's helmet, he could hear strange sounds coming from outside. Howls and screeches echoed across the landscape. "What kind of animals live on this moon?" he asked. "The kind that eat cadets," Coral replied. "I read the mission briefings. There are pack hunters called razorclaw hunters. They're about 8 feet tall with natural armor and claws that can cut through most materials." "How encouraging," Jake said. His watch shift came at midnight. Jake sat at the cave entrance and looked out at the alien landscape. The moon had no moons of its own, so the only light came from the glowing mountains in the distance. Strange shadows moved between the twisted trees. Jake's suit kept giving him status updates. His heart rate was elevated from the stress and heavy gravity. His oxygen supply was at 80%. The external temperature was dropping rapidly as the night got colder. An hour into his watch, Jake saw something moving in the darkness. At first he thought it was just another shadow, but then he realized it was too big and moving too purposefully. "Contact," he whispered into his radio. "Something large moving toward our position." The rest of the squad woke up immediately. Vex moved to the cave entrance and looked out with his superior night vision. "Pack of 6 razorclaw hunters," Vex reported. "They have found our scent trail." Jake looked out and could barely see the creatures, but his suit's sensors were picking up their heat signatures. They looked like giant lizards that walked on their back legs. Their front limbs ended in claws that gleamed in the dim light. "Can we fight them?" Bright asked. "Not 6 of them," Vex replied. "We need to move, now." The squad quickly packed their gear and prepared to leave the cave. But as they got ready to go, Jake heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was a howl, but not like any animal sound he had ever heard. It was intelligent and angry. "They are calling for more," Vex said grimly. "We have maybe 5 minutes before this area is swarming with hunters." The squad left the cave and started moving as quickly as they could across the rocky ground. The heavy gravity made running nearly impossible, but they pushed themselves as hard as they could. Behind them, Jake could hear the hunters getting closer. Their claws clicked against the rocks as they ran. More howls answered the first ones, coming from different directions. "We're surrounded," Coral said, breathing hard from the effort of moving in heavy gravity. "There," Vex pointed to a cluster of large rocks ahead. "We make our stand there." The squad reached the rocks just as the first razorclaw hunter came into view. In the dim light, Jake could see that it was even bigger than the descriptions had suggested. Its armor-like skin was dark gray and covered with scars. Its claws were as long as Jake's forearm and looked sharp enough to cut through steel. "Remember your training," Vex said as he raised his weapon. "Aim for the joints where their armor is weakest." The first hunter charged at them with incredible speed. Jake aimed his weapon and fired, but the energy blast bounced off the creatures. Armored hide. The hunter leaped over the rocks they were hiding behind and landed right in the middle of their position. What happened next was chaos. The hunter's massive claws swept across the area where Jake was standing. He tried to dodge, but the heavy gravity made him slow and clumsy. The claws caught him across the chest, tearing through his environmental suit and into his flesh. Jake felt the claws penetrate deep into his chest. Pain exploded through his body as the suit's medical system started screaming warnings. He looked down and saw his suit's front panel cracked and sparking. Blood was already soaking through the torn material. The hunter prepared to finish him off, but Vex tackled the creature from the side. The Corothian's natural armor protected him from the hunter's claws as they rolled across the ground fighting. Jake tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't work properly. His suit's medical system was telling him that he had suffered massive trauma to his chest cavity. Multiple ribs were broken. His lung was punctured. He was losing blood fast. Any reasonable person would lie down and wait for medical evacuation. The wound was certainly bad enough to end his participation in the exercise. Instead, Jake tore off the damaged pieces of his environmental suit and wrapped the wounds with emergency bandages from his medical kit. The bandages turned red with blood almost immediately, but they would have to do. He picked up his weapon and looked around the battlefield. Coral was fighting 2 hunters at once, using her agility to avoid their attacks. The battle with the razorclaw hunters lasted for what felt like hours, but Jake's suit computer said it was only 20 minutes. When the last hunter fell, the squad was exhausted and battered. Jake was still standing, but barely. "We need to move," Vex said, breathing heavily. "The noise will attract more predators." Jake nodded and tried to take a step. His legs shook, and he had to lean against a rock to keep from falling. The bandages around his chest were completely soaked with blood, and new red stains were spreading across his torn suit. "Jake, you are badly hurt," Coral said, looking at her medical scanner. "The readings say you should be dead." "Scanner must be broken," Jake replied, though his voice was getting weaker. "I'm fine." It was obviously a lie. Jake's face was pale gray, and sweat was running down his forehead despite the cold air. Every breath seemed to hurt him, and he was leaving drops of blood on the rocks where he walked, but he kept walking. The squad moved through the twisted landscape for hours. Jake fell behind several times, but he always caught up. When they had to climb over fallen trees, Vex helped lift Jake up. When they crossed a stream of acid water, Bright used energy to make a bridge for Jake to walk on. "Why do you not rest?" Coral asked during one of their brief stops. "Your body needs time to heal." Jake was sitting on a rock, holding his side where the worst of his wounds were. "If I sit down for too long, I might not get back up," he said. "Honestly, better to keep moving." As the hours passed, Jake's condition got worse. His suit's medical system had given up trying to treat his injuries and was just monitoring his vital signs. The infection from the Razorclaw's dirty claws was spreading through his body. His fever was rising, and sometimes he seemed confused about where they were, but he never stopped moving. On the second day, they found themselves in a valley filled with geysers that shot acid steam into the air. The only way across was to time. There are movements between the eruptions. "I will go first," Vex said. "If I make it across safely, the rest of you follow." The Corothian's armor protected him from the acid, but the others would have to be more careful. Vex made it across without problems and signaled for the others to come. Coral went next, using her natural agility to dodge the steam jets. Bright simply floated across above the danger zone. Jake was last. He watched the pattern of the geysers for a minute, then started across. Halfway through, he stumbled and fell to one knee. A geyser erupted right next to him and acid steam washed over. His body. His suit's remaining protection was eaten away in seconds. The acid burned his skin and made his wounds even worse. Jake screamed in pain but forced himself to keep moving. He made it to the other side, but collapsed as soon as he reached safe ground. His breathing was shallow and rapid. The acid had burned away most of his bandages, and his wounds were bleeding freely again. "That is enough," Vex said firmly. "We are calling for emergency extraction." Jake cannot continue. "No," Jake whispered. He tried to sit up, but his arms wouldn't support his weight. "I can make it. Just need a minute." "Jake, look at yourself," Coral said gently. "You have lost too much blood? The infection is spreading. The acid burns are getting worse. Any other being would have died hours ago." Jake looked down at his body. His suit was mostly gone, held together by emergency patches and tape. His skin was burned and bleeding. His chest rose and fell irregularly as he struggled to breathe. "I've looked better," he admitted, "but I'm still here." Bright's glow flickered with concern. "Human stubbornness is impressive, but there are limits to what any body can endure." Jake used a nearby rock to pull himself back to his feet. It took 3 tries, and he swayed dangerously once he was upright. "But he was standing, maybe," Jake said. "But I haven't found my limit yet." They continued across the hostile landscape. Jake's movements became more and more unsteady. Sometimes he talked to people who weren't there, his fever making him see things that didn't exist. But whenever the squad stopped to rest, he was ready to keep going. On the second night, they took shelter in the ruins of an old research station. The building had been abandoned years ago when the first scientific expedition to the Crucible had ended in disaster. Jake sat against a wall, shivering despite his fever. His wounds had stopped bleeding as much, but only because he didn't have much blood left to lose. His breathing was getting worse, and there was a strange blue color around his lips. "I do not understand," Vex said quietly to the others. "How is he still conscious?" "Humans are strange," Coral replied. "I have studied their biology. They should not be able to survive this level of trauma." "Maybe they are tougher than we thought," Bright suggested. Vex looked over at Jake, who was trying to clean his weapon with shaking hands. "No, I do not think Jake is tougher than other humans. I think he has simply decided that dying is not acceptable." During the night, Jake's fever got worse. He started talking in his sleep, having conversations with people from his past. Sometimes he called out orders to soldiers who weren't there. Sometimes he seemed to be talking to his family back on Earth, but when it was his turn to take watch, he woke up and took his position without complaint. "Jake," Coral said during his watch shift. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Jake replied. He was leaning heavily against the wall, but his eyes were alert. "Why do you continue? I mean, really, why? You could call for medical evacuation and no. One would think less of you." Jake was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful despite his obvious pain. "Back home, I had a little sister," he said. "Amy, she was only 8 when I left for the academy. The night before I came here, she asked me if I was going to be brave in space." Jake paused to cough, and a little blood came up. He wiped it away and continued. "I told her I would try my best. She said that being brave didn't mean you weren't scared. It meant you did what needed to be done even when you were scared." "That is wise for an 8-year-old, Coral said. "Amy was always smart," Jake said with a weak smile. "The thing is, if I quit now, I'll have to go home and tell her that I gave up when things got hard. I don't think I could face that." "So you continue for your sister?" Jake shook his head slowly. "I continue because quitting would mean the people who said humans were weak were right. And I can't let that happen." On the 3rd day, they finally saw the extraction point in the distance. It was a landing pad built on top of a hill, with a beacon flashing to guide them home. But between them and safety was the biggest challenge. Yet, the hillside was crawling with creatures unlike anything they had seen before. These weren't just hunters looking for food. These were territorial predators defending their home. "There must be 50 of them," Vex said, looking through his scope. Jake squinted at the hillside. His vision was blurry from the fever, but he could make out the shapes moving among the rocks. "So how do we get past them?" he asked. "We don't," Coral said. "We wait for them to move away and then make our approach. How long will that take?" "Maybe hours, maybe days." Jake looked at his watch. They had 6 hours left before the extraction deadline. If they missed it, they would have to survive another week on the Crucible until the next pickup. "I don't have days," Jake said quietly. He was realistic about his condition. His body was running on determination alone, and that wouldn't last much longer. "Then what do you suggest?" Bright asked. Jake studied the hillside for a few minutes. The creatures seemed to be concentrated in certain areas, leaving gaps in their coverage. "We go straight up the middle," Jake said. "Fast and loud. Don't try to be sneaky, just run for the beacon." "That is suicide," Vex said. "We will never make it." Jake checked his weapon and started walking toward the hillside. "Maybe, but I'd rather die trying than die waiting." The others looked at each other. They had come this far together. They weren't going to abandon their teammate now. "All right," Vex said. We followed Jake's plan. As they approached the hillside, Jake felt strangely calm. His fever was breaking, and his mind was clearer than it had been in hours. His body was shutting down, but his will was stronger than ever. "Whatever happens," he said to his squad, "it's been an honor serving with you." Then he started running up the hill, and all hell broke loose. Jake ran up the hillside with his squad behind him. His legs felt like they were made of wood, and every breath was agony, but he kept moving. The creatures on the hillside heard them coming and turned to face the intruders. These predators were different from the razor-claw hunters they had fought before. They were bigger, with thick hide that looked like stone. Their heads were massive, with jaws full of teeth designed for crushing bone. They moved on 4 legs but could rear up on their back legs to attack. "Contact front!" Vex shouted as the first creature charged toward them. Jake raised his weapon and fired. The energy blast hit the creature in the chest, but barely slowed it. "Down!" The beast slammed into Jake and sent him tumbling down the hillside. He rolled over sharp rocks and came to rest against a twisted tree. For a moment, Jake didn't move. His squad thought he was finished. The impact would have killed most beings, and Jake was already barely alive. Then Jake pushed himself up from the ground. His weapon was broken, but he picked up a sharp piece of metal from his damaged suit. Blood was running from new cuts on his face, but his eyes were still determined. "Is that all you've got?" Jake said to the creature, though his voice was so Weak that only his radio picked it up, the beast charged again. Jake couldn't dodge this time. He was too slow and too hurt. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone watching. He charged back. Jake ran straight at the creature that outweighed him by 500 pounds. At the last second, he dove low and jammed his makeshift weapon into the soft spot under the beast's jaw. The creature's own momentum drove the metal deep into its brain. Both Jake and the creature collapsed in a heap. The beast was dead, but Jake was trapped underneath its massive body. "Jake!" Coral shouted. She and the others were fighting their own battles with more creatures, but she could see Jake wasn't moving. Vex smashed his current opponent with his armored fists and ran to help. Jake, he lifted the dead creature off the human and looked down. At his squadmate, Jake was barely breathing. His improvised weapon had been driven back into his own chest when the creature fell on him. New blood was pooling around his body, mixing with the old stains, but Jake's eyes were still open, and he was trying to speak. "Beacon," he whispered. "Need to reach the beacon." "Jake, you cannot continue," Vex said gently. "Your body has reached its limit." "Not yet," Jake replied. He tried to sit up but couldn't. His body wouldn't obey him anymore. More creatures were coming. The noise of the battle had attracted every predator in the area. Bright was firing energy blasts as fast as possible. But there were too many enemies. Coral was using her agility to avoid their attacks, but she was getting tired. "We have to move," Bright called out. "More coming from all directions." Vex looked down at Jake, then at the extraction beacon still 50 yards away. The human couldn't walk anymore, but leaving him behind was not an option. "I will carry you," Vex decided. "No," Jake said, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Too heavy. Can't fight while carrying me." "Then what do you suggest?" Jake looked at the beacon flashing in the distance. So close, but it might as well have been on another planet. His body was shutting down piece by piece. His vision was going dark around the edges, but his mind was still working. "Distraction," Jake said. "I'll draw them off." "You get to the beacon." "That is suicide," Coral said. She had heard the conversation over the radio. "Maybe," Jake admitted, "but you'll make it." Before anyone could stop him, Jake rolled away from Vex and started crawling toward the largest group of creatures. He was moving on his hands and knees, leaving a trail of blood behind him. But he was moving. The creatures saw him coming and turned their attention to this strange, broken prey that refused to die. They surrounded Jake, snapping and clawing at him. Jake pulled out his last grenade and held it up where they could see it. "Come on then," he said loudly. "Let's finish this." While the creatures focused on Jake, his squad ran for the extraction beacon. Vex's natural armor protected him from the few creatures that tried to stop them. Coral's speed let her dodge around obstacles. Bright simply floated above the worst of the danger. They reached the beacon just as the extraction ship arrived. The pilot's voice came over the radio. "Squad 7, prepare for immediate departure. We have multiple contacts closing on your position." "Wait," Vex said. "We have a man down. Human Jake is still out there." Through the ship's cameras, they could see Jake surrounded by creatures. He was still on his knees, but he was fighting them with his bare hands. The grenade was gone, probably used to take out several of the beasts. "I'm sorry," the pilot said, "but we cannot risk the ship. If he's still alive when we come back next week, we'll pick him up then." "He will not be alive next week," Vex said. Angrily, "He will not be alive in the next hour." Then he knew the risks when he volunteered for the distraction. Vex was about to argue more when Jake's voice came over the radio one last time. "Squad 7, this is Jake. Mission accomplished. You made it to the beacon." "Jake, hold on," Coral said. "We're coming back for you." "Negative," Jake replied. His voice was calm despite the chaos around him. "You complete the mission. That's an order." "You are not in command of this squad," Vex pointed out. Jake's laugh came through the radio, weak, but genuine. "No, but I'm the one who's about to become a very expensive distraction. Get on that ship." The pilot was getting nervous. "Squad 7, we leave in 30 seconds with or without you." Vex made a decision that went against every instinct he had. He boarded the extraction ship with Coral and Bright. As the ship lifted off, they watched through the windows as Jake continued his impossible fight. He was surrounded by creatures that should have killed him instantly. His body was broken and bleeding. He should have been dead hours ago, but Jake Morrison was still fighting. The ship climbed higher, and soon they lost sight of the battle. The pilot was already calling ahead to report the mission results. Squad 7 returning to base. 3 cadets extracted successfully. 1 human cadet lost in action during final approach to beacon. But Commander Tallis, monitoring from the command center, was looking at something strange on his screens. Pilot, what is the status of Cadet Morrison's life signs? Unknown, sir. His suit's transmitter was damaged in the final battle. I see. Continue to base. But Tallis didn't stop monitoring. He switched to the Crucible's orbital surveillance system and focused on the area around the extraction beacon. What he saw made him call for an immediate medical team. Jake was still moving. The creatures that had surrounded him were all dead or fled. Jake himself was crawling across the rocky ground, moving inch by inch toward the beacon. His body was a mess of cuts, burns, and puncture wounds. He should have been dead 10 times over, but he was still crawling toward the beacon. Medical team to the Crucible, emergency extraction, Tallis ordered. We have a cadet who refuses to die. The medical ship reached Jake just as he collapsed for the final time. His hand was stretched out toward the beacon, only 3 feet away. From reaching it, the medical team rushed to check his vital signs. According to their instruments, Jake Morrison had no pulse, no blood pressure, and no brain activity, but when they lifted him onto the stretcher, Jake opened his eyes. Did we make it? He whispered. Yes, Cadet Morrison, the chief medic said in amazement. You made it. Jake smiled and closed his eyes. This time, he finally let himself rest. 3 days later, Jake woke up in the Academy's medical center. His chest was covered in bandages and machines were monitoring his vital signs. But he was alive. Vex was sitting in a chair beside his bed along with Coral and Bright. How long was I out? Jake asked. 72 hours, Vex replied. The doctors say you died twice on the operating table, but you came back both times. Stubborn, Jake said with a weak smile. The entire Academy is talking about you, Coral said. They are calling you the cadet who would not die. More importantly, Bright added, Squad 7 passed the final test. We are all graduating. Jake tried to sit up but winced in pain. Good, that's what matters. Commander Tallis entered the medical bay. The scarred veteran looked at Jake with an expression that might have been respect. Cadet Morrison, he said formally, your actions during the Crucible trial have been noted. You will be receiving a commendation for valor. Thank you, sir, Jake replied. I have one question, Tallis continued. What drives a being to continue when their body has already given up? Jake thought about it for a moment. I think it's because giving up is a choice, sir. As long as you can still make choices, you're not really beaten, Tallis nodded slowly. The galaxy is about to learn something important about humans, Cadet Morrison. You have shown that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who refuses to accept defeat. Word of Jake's feat spread throughout the Academy and beyond. Other species began to reconsider their opinions about human combat capability. Humans might not be the strongest or fastest, but they had something else that was perhaps more valuable. They had the ability to keep going when any rational being would stop. Jake Morrison graduated from the Academy with honors and went on to serve in the United World's Defense Force. His squad became legendary for their refusal to surrender in impossible situations, and whenever young cadets asked how they could become better warriors, instructors would tell them about the human who took a blow that would hospitalize most.